Good morning. My name's Daniel Jacobs. I'm sharing my screen right now, so hopefully you can see the PowerPoint. Um, this is the second stakeholder feedback session on implementing second substitute House Bill 1701 on leasing liquor premises. The session's being recorded. The first session was on Monday, June 8th from 1 o'clock. It covers the exact same material, so this isn't like a part two. This is a duplicate of Monday's session for folks who weren't able to make it to Monday. Folks who aren't able to make it today either, the recordings of both today and Monday's sessions will be posted to the LCB website by the end of the week, along with this PowerPoint. Again, my name is Daniel Jacobs. I'm a policy and rules coordinator here at the LCB, and we are going to get started. So the objective today is to obtain public feedback on draft rule language that's implementing second substitute House Bill 1701 on leasing liquor premises. Any feedback or questions, please contact me or my team at rules@lcb.wa.gov. That's the rules inbox, which is rules@lcb.wa.gov. I'm just going to get underway here. So just a few notes before we formally get underway. As I mentioned, both sessions are recorded. They are subject to public disclosure. The purpose of the recordings is to make sure that we collect all the feedback that we get. We're also going to, as I mentioned, post these recordings later on the rules webpage, so those who can't attend can watch them later. As I also mentioned, the PowerPoint is also going to be posted on the rules webpage. While the Teams chat is disabled, written questions can be submitted during or after the session. Email those to the rules inbox, rules@lcb.wa.gov. Only the presenters, which is just going to be me, so only the presenter, will have their microphone on during the session. Commenters are going to be muted by default, and you're only going to be unmuted when I turn on your microphone, which leads to the next thing of how do you ask questions. If you want to ask a question during the session or while I'm talking, please use the raise hand function on Teams. When you do that, and then when it's time to answer the question, I will unmute you, or I will unlock you, which basically means then you can unmute yourself. So you raise your hand, then once I'm like, oh, okay, let's see if we have a question, then you'll be able to unmute yourself. You unmute yourself and you say, yeah, Daniel, here's my question. After you're done with your question, we've moved on. If you leave your hand raised, which happens sometimes, or if you leave yourself unmuted, we might mute you. By might, I mean, I will mute you if we hear background noise and stuff, or if you accidentally leave your little icon hand raised. And so with that, let's get underway. I'll pause periodically to sort of say if there are any questions. So if you raise your hand and I'm in the middle of a sentence or the middle of making a point, I might finish my point and then I'll come to you. So here we go. So the rulemaking timeline. So the rulemaking process, I'm not going to explain. I can explain briefly what the rulemaking phases are. So basically they're done in 3 steps. The first one is the CR 101, which says, hey, we're thinking of doing rules. Here, because we're implementing legislation, we don't really have a choice. We have to do rulemaking. The legislature passed a law and said, this is something that we're going to do. And so now we need to change our regulations to comply with that law. That already happened. And the board has delegated authority to us to say, hey, once the legislature passes a law, you don't need to ask the board for permission to get rulemaking started, because it's not like there's a debate as to whether or not we're going to do rulemaking. We don't have a choice. So we're doing rulemaking. That was filed on April 13th. It was filed as Washington State Register 2609065. If you want to, you can click on it and look at it. Full disclosure, it's not particularly interesting. It basically just says we're doing rulemaking, implementing this law because we have to. Right now, we are at the stakeholder engagement phase. And actually today, June 11th, the law officially goes into effect. Yay! So assuming that today's stakeholder feedback session goes well, we're tentatively on schedule to go to the next phase, which is called the CR 102, to seek approval of that from the board during the July 1st meeting. And what that phase looks like is us saying, hey, this is what we think we want our rule language to look like. And that's really what the bulk of today's session is going to be talking about, is talking about what our ideas for the rule language are. And hopefully we hear, oh, Daniel, that's all great. You're so smart. That's a wonderful idea. Or, hey, this doesn't make sense. Or, hey, what does that mean? Like, to get feedback to make sure that we're on the right path. Assuming we are on the right path, the tentative rules will be filed with the CR 102, and that kicks off the public feedback time. So then from July 1st to August 12th, folks can look at the draft rule language, look at our materials, and submit written comments basically saying, hey, this is a great idea, or hey, this is a terrible idea, or I don't understand what this means, or I have this question and your rules don't answer it. What about this scenario? I don't know how that would play out in the rules. Honestly, those types of questions are actually the most helpful, is if our rules don't answer a question or don't make something clear, that's like the most important thing, because really that's what we want to make sure we get right. And the periods open, the comments are going to be open from July 1st to August 12th, because on August 12th, we're going to tentatively have a public hearing. And that's where basically, kind of similar to this, except we open the floor and virtually, or if you really want to come down in person, you can. You have to come down to Olympia. You don't have to. You can just do it virtually. On August 12th, right. So we're going to have the public hearing. Gives opportunity for folks to come in person or virtually and say basically what they could in writing, which is, hey, the rules are great, or hey, the rules are terrible, or this doesn't make sense. After the public hearing, we'll decide whether or not we're ready to finalize the rules. So if there's some minor tweak we need to make where it's like, oh, that word should say something different, or that sentence is a little confusing, let's mix it, sort of change the wording around, or change the order of the sentence, or move a comma, then we could just do that and go to the final stage. If it's something that's more substantive, where it's like, hey, we missed explaining a whole concept, we need to change these rules a lot, then we may need to go back to the drawing board and do a CR 102 again. I don't think that's going to happen. That doesn't happen a whole lot, but it's possible. However, assuming everything goes well, we would have the rules finalized and requested for approval during the September 2nd board meeting. And if that happens, then these rules will be in effect October 3rd. I know that was a lot, so I'll pause here and see if there are any questions just on that aspect. Also, if during the session you're like, no, everything Daniel said made sense, but then later on during lunch or this afternoon, you're out and about, you're buying groceries, and you're like, wait a minute, that thing Daniel said, I thought it made sense at the time, but now it actually doesn't, or I actually have a question that I just thought of, feel free to email us at the rules inbox. That's rules@lcb.law.gov, and then we'll be able to follow up and explain it. So our rulemaking goals here are implement second substitute House bill, which is short for that is 2SHB 1701, and create consistency with existing sections of regulation of Title 314 WAC. So what does 2SHB 1701 do? It allows liquor licensees to lease real or personal property to other liquor licensees. It also allows liquor licensees to lease use of their kitchen to somebody else, to either a liquor licensee or a non-licensee. The law says that the board, we can require submission of the leases, and spoiler alert, that we will. We are going to require you guys to submit the leases. And lastly, it allows breweries, distilleries, wineries to operate in a separate space on the same premises as a retail licensee. So that's basically where, right, you own the whole building, a brewery, winery, distillery owns a whole building, and, one part of the building they're in, they can lease another part of the building that's a separate space to, a grocery store with a beer wine license or something else, a bar, whatever it is. So I put these links here. This is the link to the actual bill language. If you haven't read the bill, I encourage you to do so. And then this is the draft rule language, which is what we're just going to be going over now. I'm not going to go over the bill language in detail because I've sort of briefly gone over what it does here. And hopefully if you're attending this, then you're aware of generally what the bill does. So we're proposing one new rule, which is going to be at 314.02.006, calling it liquor licensee leases. And we're proposing to amend two existing rules, one of them on the liquor licensee qualifications and application process, and one on prohibited practices of contracts, gifts, and rebates. Most of our time today is going to be spent on what the new rule looks like, and at the end, I'll talk about the changes we make to existing rule. For the most part, the changes to existing rule are really us just saying that this now you're allowed to do this leasing consistent with the statute and the new rule. I'm just going to jump right into it. So the first thing that we're talking about here is the definitions. So for this session, I'm just going to use the most common situation that folks are familiar with a lease, which is a car. If I'm leasing a car from a car dealership, people know generally what a lease is, but this is a fancy word for it. But with lessee and lessor, if I'm leasing a car from the dealership, I'm the lessee and the dealership is the lessor. Now, these definitions, we didn't come up on our own. We copied them, not verbatim, but almost verbatim from existing law, which is going to be RCW 62A 2A-103. And that comes from the law governing contracts in our state, which is called the Uniform Commercial Code. And that section talks about the definitions for leases. So because, again, our expertise is liquor and cannabis, we were like, you know what? Let's find existing Washington law that defines lease and lessor and lessee, and we'll just copy mostly what they say. Here, when we talk about a person, we're not just using the RCW definition that we have in our liquor law, because our liquor law definition of person doesn't include an LLC. And so we just want to make clear that we're also talking about LLCs. Lastly, this is a separate space. So remember earlier when I said that a distillery that has the premises can operate out of a separate space from a retail liquor licensee? Excuse me, this is explaining what we mean by separate space. And we don't mean that there need to be walls separating it. There can be walls, that would work, but it just needs to be a physical barrier. We're not going into all detail on how high the barrier needs to be and all that other stuff. That stuff's in other areas of liquor law, but frankly, we want something that's clearly a separate space. If you have questions on what does and doesn't count, that's exactly the type of thing that, submit comments on. Or submit feedback on and say, hey, the separate space definition, that's not sufficient. You guys got to explain more clearly what that is. I'll just pause here, see if there are any questions on this front. All right, seeing none, let's keep going. So the next is the lease submission. So I talked about this. So the RCW, and this is the law that 1701 changed. 1701 added this section 13 to RCW 6624.010. And like I had said earlier, the statute gives the board the right to require submission of these leases. And we're saying, thank you for giving us that option. We are going to take you up on that. So if you do leases like this, and if you're familiar with the LCB, having to submit stuff to us, it shouldn't be a foreign concept to you. This is one more document that you got to submit to us. And also the second part, which is all agreements and contracts described here, have to be kept and maintained consistent with existing record requirements. And this is similar, that it's like, listen, if you're required to submit it to the LCB, you're also required to hold on to it, which honestly, not to give you business advice, but if you're submitting something, if you're required to submit something, you should probably keep a copy of it just in case. And we're saying, instead of just as a general good practice, you're also now required to do it in rule. I'll pause here, see if there are any questions. It seems pretty straightforward, but again, it's always good to hear if there's something that's not totally clear. All right, seeing none, let's go to the next one. So this is about kitchen space. So the law specifically says that licensees can lease out their kitchen space. Since it calls it out specifically, we want to talk about it here. So a lessor, so lessor, think the car dealership that leases use of its kitchen to a lessee, me, the guy leasing the car. So the dealership has to comply with the following. So lessor, the dealership has to ensure that that the person leasing the car has all the required local, state, and local business licenses before operating out of the kitchen. This is something that comes straight from the statute. So we're putting it into rule. Here, the licensees, we have to maintain separate secure storage of their alcohol inventory when leasing kitchen space. So this is saying basically, and it's similar to other laws where we have folks sharing space, which is if you have liquor, you got to secure your liquor store. You got to secure your liquor, whether you keep it in a locked storage, whether it's in a separate room. But if you're leasing your kitchen and especially if your liquor's in the kitchen, make sure it's locked up. Make sure other folks can't get access to it. This third requirement is a licensee can lease out the kitchen space, but not contract out their food service unless either A, the licensee isn't required to do for food service, or as permitted in these rules. And now this refers to rulemaking that was recently done on contract kitchens, which I think was implementing legislation from last year. But we're making clear here, and the statute makes clear that leasing out your kitchen space isn't the same thing as contracting out your food service. So this rule is just talking about leasing out the physical space that is the kitchen, not having somebody else cook and prep your food for you. You can do that, but that's consistent with a different set of rules. I'll pause here, see if there are any questions, because I know that with kitchen stuff, it can get a little complicated. All right, great. And again, if there are any questions later, I have a feeling we'll have a little bit of extra time at the end. So if there are any questions later, feel free to ask them then, or like I said, later on today, you're doing whatever on the west side of the state, hopefully enjoying the sun. And if you're on the east side of the state, hopefully enjoying the sun too. I don't know what the weather is on the east side of the state right now. So let's go on to the next section. Lease requirements. So this is, again, whatever the lease is about, whether it's kitchen space or not, has to comply with these things. So one, you can't have any profit or revenue sharing. This comes straight from the statute. So we're putting it in rule. Second, leases shall not require that the lessee, person borrowing the car, serve products made by the dealership. So, if a distillery is leasing space to a bar, the distillery can't require the bar to serve its product. This is consistent with Tide House rules and just sort of tier separation. Also, it's so in statute. A logical extension of that is, while it's not in statute, we're putting it in rule, is that leases can't require that the person borrowing the car advertise products made by the dealership. So just like I said, a distillery that leases out half of its premises to a bar can't require that bar to serve its product. It also can't require that bar to advertise its product. So even if they're like, we don't sell it here, but this is a really great vodka or whatever it is, you can't do that. That's, again, for similar reasons of Tide House and wanting to make sure there aren't like onerous financial relationships involved. Lastly, it says leases shall not require any activity prohibited by WAC 314-12-140 or other sections of Title 314 WAC. Seems like it'd be obvious that you can't have a contract that requires you to do something illegal, but that's basically what we're saying here. Saying, hey, you can't put something in your lease that requires someone to violate the law, in our case, liquor regulations. I'll pause, see if there are any questions. All right. Moving on, the last thing just says this isn't a shared space rule. We have shared space rules and we have laws that specifically allow licensees to share space with other licensees. While the law specifically says that the lessor dealership can also operate out of the same premises as the person they're leasing to. That's not, you're not supposed to be sharing the same space. You're supposed to be in separate spaces. So, like I said, the, lessor dealership, they own the whole building. It's got two sort of spaces. Excuse me. The person that owns the building is in one space. They're leasing the second space to another person, but it's supposed to be a second space. These statutes all explicitly allow space sharing space sharing. But this law, this rule, and this law isn't one of these. This is talking about something different, which is why we're talking about leases. Just making clear that this isn't, we're not talking about the same thing here. You are allowed to share space, but it has to be consistent with these rules, not, this isn't expanding that pie. I'll pause, see if there are any questions, or if there are any questions on anything on this new rule that I've talked about, because this is the end of our discussion on the new rule. And next, we're going to go on to changes to existing rules. All right, seeing none, let's keep going. So this is a little fancy, not fancy. This is a table that talks about changes to existing rules. So we've got our two rules that we're making changes to here, WAC 314.07020 and WAC 314.12.140. In both, we add this language here, which just says licensees are allowed to do the leasing stuff that we're talking about, consistent with the two new sections of RCW that are added and our new rule. These two phrases are related to implementation of 1602. So in 1602 is the contract kitchen rule I was talking about. So while we were looking at these rules, we realized that really 314.07020 should also have added in language talking about the contract kitchen rule. So these two are added to this one. They're not added to this one. I probably should have put no over here, but I forgot to. So, and again, so this isn't really related to our rulemaking, but we realized when looking at these rules that we probably should have added it in during the 1602 rulemaking. So we're doing so now. Pause. Actually, I was about to pause here, see if there are any questions, but that's the end of the presentation. Now I can just answer general questions about it before I can go on and talk about what our next steps are. And we're very ahead of schedule. So questions on, feel free to ask, be like, hey, go back to several slides, ask questions about something I said earlier. It's all fair game. All right. Well, seeing none, again, if you have a question later today, feel free to email the rules inbox. That's rules@lcb.wa.gov. I'll talk about the next steps. So our next steps are that we collect the feedback we've received during these stakeholder engagement sessions, meet with the project team to determine whether or not we can move forward to the CR 102 stage, which it looks like we're going to be able to do so, and then proceed to the 102 stage, which is on schedule for July 1st. That's our presentation. Again, I'll do a last call for questions. I had a law school professor who used to yell out before class, last call for a good time. Lori Levinson at Loyola Law School, shout out. So that's what she'd always say. So I guess I'll say the same thing. Last call for a good time. Anybody got any questions? All right, seeing none, I will conclude this stakeholder feedback session. Thank you all for your participation. Hope you all have a good rest of your day. And thanks so much.